Dom and Johnny in the morning. I figured I'd start today with a little bit of a follow-up over last week because I looked it up. The one pinyin, we were talking about how it's like a different form.
Yeah.
And from looking it up, it is Taikyoku Shodan. So apparently the Taikyoku series was developed by Yoshitaka Funakoshi.
I'm assuming related to Gichin.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was. I don't know what the relationship is, but I know that Yoshitaka developed it. Gichin Funakoshi was the one that actually started introducing it and teaching it to people. And it's a simpler version of the Heian series. So the Heian series was designed to be simple kata, and then the Taikyoku series was even a simpler version of that. So if you look at, like you were saying, Heian Shodan kind of looks like one pinyin, but there's some stuff in there that isn't in one pinyin.
Yeah.
But Taikyoku Shodan is very, very close to one pinyin.
Hey, that's really a testament to Master Valari, because those 5 Heian forms were supposed to be like for children.
Yeah.
Like, they were supposed to be like these basic forms to help children like step into the karate world. They weren't supposed to be these,
tent pole kind of pieces of curriculum. Yeah.
And then somewhere down the line, whether it was Pasari or Sirio or Valari, I think probably a combination of the 3, because if you look at the way each of the students did these forms, there's definitely massive differences depending on their own fighting philosophies. But there is so much in these forms now. These are not basic forms.
Yeah.
You could spend a year doing one of these forms and, not even become close to squeezing out all the juice,
Well, it's interesting because, like, last week, one of the questions we answered was if you had to remove a form, which one would you do? And we basically both said, like, around the same thing, some combination of one pinyin, 2 pinyin. You could get rid of one of them because the other one maintains the pattern, and you could really just adjust the pattern to match the principles of both of them. What's interesting, having now watched the Taikyoku series and the Heian series on YouTube, just because, when you look at, say, Heian Sandan, which is pretty close to 3 pinyin, how we teach it, it's more of a template, and 3 pinyin has a lot in it that Sandan does not. There's some stuff in Sandan where I'm like, that makes sense. I see why they do it that way. And there's a lot of things, like I was just teaching what we call the cheerleader section to an adult student last night, and it's like there's a lot in there that was added that is not in Sandan traditionally. So I do think one of the reasons it is a kind of like a tentpole thing is just because a lot got added in. It wasn't just, copied and pasted from what it was.
Yeah. And I think we've kind of stepped towards more of the, or at least Master Valari did, the fight aspect. Because even if you look at that, these were forms taught to kids, and yet you're doing a spear hand to the solar plexus. Which any child that tried to spearhand another child in the solar plexus is probably going to break their fingers.
Right.
So, very interesting. And, we at least, Master Valari, number one, it's a green belt form. You've been training for a decent amount of time at this point. You know, at the very least, if you're, an upper teen or adult and you're working really hard, maybe a little after a year of training.
Right.
But for kids, a good while. But at least that spear hand's going to, a softer target.
Right. Yeah.
And then you don't see the spear hand to the chest until brown belt.
Yeah. Which is also, actually, the spear hand to the chest reminded me, it is funny because I've been in conversations with martial artists in our style over the years, and some of them have said, like, 4 kata feels more like a karate form to them. And, well, it's because if you look at Heian Nidan, which would be like the second form in the Heian series, very, very close to 4 kata. 4 kata seems like a permutated version of Nidan, in the same way that 3 pinyin seems like an added on version of Heian Sandan. So it is. It's a reminder to me anyway that a lot of times Shaolin, Kempo, and Karate, those 3 styles, are often spoken of separately, but there is a lot of overlap. Like, we don't, like, reading Fred Villari's book recently, he doesn't refer to his style as like Shaolin and then Kempo, and then he just refers to it as Shaolin Kempo, like one word, like the Shaolinized, Kempoized blend. And I think that's helpful to remember that, even if you're doing like a kata, and we think of that as a Kempo form, there are karate elements. In the same way, when you're doing a karate form, there are Shaolin and Kempo elements kind of built in, because this is a hybrid style. It's not just 3 separate styles we train in separately.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because I've heard Jesse Enkamp, if anyone follows him, the karate nerd, I've heard him say before that the terms Kempo and karate in Japan are almost interchangeable.
Yeah.
So even though, Kempo is derived from Chuan Fa, the fist law, in Chinese, Chuan Fa, fist law, in Japanese, Kempo, or way of the fist or method of the fist, whichever, translation you want to use. But when it came over to Hawaii, it was a style of karate, and once it started getting all these injections with Western boxing and judo and all these other things, we started to think of Kempo as its own thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to the fact that if there's tangent, but if you ever want to see something cool, Jesse Enkamp, the karate nerd, on YouTube, or I'm sure he has other mediums.
He's on TikTok too.
Yeah. Go to his series. He did Karate Nerd in Okinawa, and I cannot remember if it was season 1 or season 2, but he goes to I think it was Ryukyu Kempo, and he talks about how that they are continuously updating. Whenever someone comes in, they see something new, they absorb it, which is very different from what you'd think of traditional karate. So it's very possible that has always been like the Kempo way, and that's why Kempo in America became so distinct, because the second it hit, it just started absorbing everything around it. And Hawaii had a big influence because they had a massive Filipino community, so big influence in Filipino martial arts. And then, the island was full of Navy men, so, you had a lot of boxing and judo, because those were the big, styles, especially for the military back then, and pretty much some of the biggest styles in America, with exception to wrestling. So it started absorbing it, and then we started thinking of Kempo being different than karate. But for the most part, Kempo was always Kempo karate. Mm-hmm. So even in the American Kempo system that Ed Parker developed, it's still American Kempo karate.
Yeah.
And the Kempo karate are usually not pulled apart as we teach Kempo and karate. We teach Kempo karate. And I think that's the same. I would think that's the same with our system, even though we tend to split them just to further accent how explosive and destructive pure karate is, which is a awesome point. But I think even when you're looking at our karate, I think anyone that trains in traditional karate would probably scoff at us saying it's traditional karate.
And they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's got a Kempo flavor to it, because it's Kempo karate.
Yeah, and I do think that when you're talking in terms of skill progression, separating them can be useful, if nothing else than to just teach principles. So, if you get a new white belt student, you're not going to be teaching them anything too sophisticated. You're going to teach them how to palm, you're going to teach them how to kick, and when you call it karate, it's really just, like you said, accenting the principle of just hit as hard as you can, because, especially for an untrained person, that one thing that they do is the difference between disruption and not disrupting the opponent enough. When we hit blue belt, it's been a few months of training. That's where, like, when we talk about Kempo and rhythm and the things we normally associate with Kempo separated from karate, like, you're just adding a different tool to the toolbox. And for, like, expert listeners, the goal isn't to keep them separate. It's like we talked about with the animals. The goal is that they layer on each other over time. But you also do have to start somewhere. I think that a lot of times, like martial artists that have been around for a while, they're on their journey. It's hard to step back and look through their art through the lens of a beginner. I did have a follow-up question, just because you know so much more about the history than I do.
Oh, boy.
Gichin Funakoshi, who introduced the Taikyoku series. Who is that in relation to maybe our art or the art in general?
So he is Gichin Funakoshi was one of the original founders of karate. This was back when karate started getting names. So he taught his style of karate at his dojo, which was called Shotokan, and he didn't believe that karate should have their own style names. He believed karate was karate. We teach karate. There is no Goju-ryu karate or Water-ryu karate. But unfortunately for him, because his dojo's name was Shotokan, people started calling it Shotokan karate. But that is known as a very hard style of karate. So despite the fact that he thought karate was karate, Shotokan tends to be harder than something like Goju-ryu or Water-ryu.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, he's like the founder of like modern karate.
Yeah.
Because karate, like just in general, has been around for a while.
Yeah.
But like modern karate and how we think of it.
Back when it was just Tay.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this on an earlier podcast, but it was originally regional. So all the different regions in Okinawa, and this was before Okinawa was Okinawa. It was the Ryukyu Kingdom.
Yep.
And there was, the Naga, which Naga still exists, and Tamari still exists, and Shuri. But you'd had, Nagate, Tamari-te, Shuri-te. There's another one. I can't remember what it is. And then when Japan, decided that, or mainland Japan decided that Okinawa was part of Japan, they didn't really have a choice in that matter.
Right.
They were looking to establish karate as, a national symbol. And that's when, they had to start updating things. They had to make, one name, and
Yep.
It ended up being Empty Hand. China Hand was thrown around, Todi, but that wasn't going to fly with mainland Japan at the time, because there was a lot of strife between China and Japan at that point. But yeah, and Gichin Funakoshi was kind of at the forefront of that.
Yeah, I was looking this up because I was wondering, because you asked who Yoshitaka Funakoshi was in relation. So apparently Yoshitaka Funakoshi is widely known as Gigo Funakoshi, which is Gichin Funakoshi's third son.
Oh, cool.
So apparently, and he was also very influential in founding Shotokan. Or what we call Shotokan, because Gichin Funakoshi would be rolling in his grave, knowing. But so I guess they worked together to kind of develop this Taikyoku series, and there is like a Taikyoku, Nidan, Sandan, kind of like the Heian series, except it looks nothing like what we do.
Oh, gotcha.
So really, it's only Taikyoku Shodan that is our one pinyin. The other ones seem to like come from other stuff.
Neat.
So yeah,
I didn't know that about the Funakoshi. That's cool.
Yeah. That is what Google told me anyway. So it's it's possible that it could be wrong.
I believe everything Google tells me.
But all right. With an end cap on that, our big question today, which I think is a super amazing question to ask. What makes an amazing training partner?
Ooh, all right. Did you want to kick this one off? Or?
Sure. I'm hoping to get more specific, but I think broad view, I think the most important quality with a training partner is trust. Mm-hmm. I think it really all boils down to that. Interestingly, I think I talked about in one episode. So I'm also really into like Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games. And what's interesting with those is that it's so similar to the martial arts in that it's not like other games where there are specific procedures you have to follow. Mm-hmm. There's a lot you can kind of, in a TTRPG, make up on the fly. It's really about being responsive to the other people at the table. So, being fans of each other's ideas and stuff. And in that way, it can be very explorative in the same way the martial arts can be. And I do know that one thing that gets talked about in that circle is how trust is like the most important thing. And my personal dissatisfaction with the conversation is usually that's where it ends. It's like, as long as you guys trust each other, everything will be fine. But, right, that's a great sentiment, but it's like, how do you take action on that? So to me, I think an amazing training partner would be someone that you trust. And how do you develop trust? How do you maintain trust? What goes into that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. There's a very strong ebb and flow with a training partner. You need to, make sure you're not pushing them too hard to the point where it's no longer just uncomfortable. You're no longer in a state of learning, and you're no longer in a mental, good mental state anymore. If you're freaked out and afraid to get punched, then things are going to be different. If you're flinching every time they move, then you guys probably haven't been good training partners to each other.
Yeah.
So I think trust is huge, and it's always good to have someone that you've trusted prior to entering in some sort of training partnership with, but sometimes not the case. A lot of times you meet your training partner at karate, and then you have to develop that trust just through working with them in class. And I think people naturally start to gravitate towards those they enjoy working with. Mm-hmm. I know I always did. There were people that I would run to to work with. But I think if you have a good training partner, they are not just letting you win.
Right.
But they're not trying to make you fail. That's that fine line I think you have to tread across is, as a training partner, you officially take on the role of being responsible for your partner's growth.
Yeah.
And that's tough. Obviously there's responsibility to the other practitioner too. They have to actually be, practicing in a way that's going to be beneficial to them.
Right.
But your job is to make it only difficult enough where they can experience growth, and not too difficult where they can't.
Yeah, I think if I were to sum that up with one word, because a lot of times one words can become a mantra to just remind you of the bigger picture, it'd be attentiveness. So if you're attentive as a partner, you can make those adjustments to make sure that you're not going too rough, but also you're not going too wimpy. And responsibility isn't like mutually exclusive. Just because like the other person's taking responsibility for their journey doesn't mean you can't also take responsibility for being the best possible training partner that you can. Mm-hmm. Attentiveness is a huge part. And on the subject of failing, it's like it really comes down to definitions and stuff. So, in a sparring match, you might win a sparring match, right? That doesn't mean the other person failed. The only failure is not learning. So as long as both people can work to understand how the experience was valuable and beneficial, you're going to continuously be growing. On the attentiveness front, I think the other thing to keep in mind is developing strong recovery systems. And the reason I say it like that is because, again, this comes from the TTRPG world, where there's a lot of focus on prevention, meaning like, oh, if you do XYZ, you shouldn't have to deal with these troubles at the table. In martial arts, a lot of times we have safety in mind, where it's like, if you train, like, hopefully somebody doesn't get injured. Mm-hmm. But that's not the same as saying there should never be injuries. Because even if you live your life in a way that avoids injury, we've talked about with slapping out, you're actually setting yourself up to get more hurt later down the road. So it's like, how do you invest the right amount of energy in order to prevent the most amount of injury or damage? And there will be times where people get hurt, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just, a few weeks ago, you and I were sparring, and I got kicked a little wrong and I was like limping for a while.
My bad.
That was not your fault though, because I remember going to throw my kick, and as soon as my foot left the ground, I saw you move and I said, he's going to jam my kick. His heel is going to go into the top of my thigh, and it has maybe something to do with your targeting, had a lot to do with how I set you up to hurt me. So like it wasn't your fault, right? It was just, that's training. And that was a great lesson for me. I learned a lot from that. But it's not like we should never spar. It was just like, rather than like blaming you for being inattentive, which you were being very attentive, or blaming myself for just like doing something dumb, which is what I did. It's more like, we know going in that injury is probably going to happen. So how do we recover? How do we communicate so that way, when the thing does happen, we can get back into it most gracefully? Does that?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and finding that sweet spot with partners is important too. Even hearing stories like that, makes me think. Maybe sometimes I form a little bit too much heel when I'm practicing. It's the same with hook kicking someone in sparring. Yes, in real life, hitting them with the back of your heel is opportune, but in a sparring match, hitting them with the bottom of your foot is a better idea.
It's nicer.
It's nicer, yeah, and you kind of learn those things as you go, and then you find ways to be able to still train those more dangerous weapons, like the heel, in different drilling situations that maybe have more padding involved.
And another part is actually what we're doing now, which is communication, right? So you've got attentiveness, taking responsibility, so in the moment you can do your best to adjust. Recovery, because you will make mistakes, so it's how do you recover from that physically and relationship-wise. Communication, right? So making sure that it's just a good match, because that's the other thing, is not everyone's going to be an amazing training partner for everybody else. Like sometimes there is simple compatibility. There have been plenty of training partners I've worked with, and at the end of the day, it wasn't them, it wasn't me, it was just incompatible. Our styles or the outcomes we wanted to produce. And the clearer we can communicate, the faster we can find that out up front. And, if you're in a group class, there's only so much you can do. Sometimes you will have to work with someone that you're incompatible with. But when it comes to, like, really getting an amazing training partner, I think communication is key.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And even taking that a step further, not just on the mats, but I've noticed over the years that those students that take these training partners, especially ones they've grown very close with, and find times to work together outside of karate, explode in talent. And that's part of communication. Tell your partner if that's something you're ever interested in. Talk to your partner. Say, hey, would you ever want to get together outside of karate and run forms, and then critique each other, or just, obviously be safe, especially for our younger listeners. This is something you probably want to run by your parents too.
Yeah.
But there are so many things that you can do safely that are really, really good just to drill. Master Graposo mentioned recently, and I think I might have mentioned on this podcast, sometimes I forget what I talk about.
Yeah.
But it was perishable skill. And, there are things that will stick with you for almost ever, and no matter how long you're outside of the martial arts, you have these skills that will never leave. And then even when you jump back into martial arts after 20 years, some of those skills are still there. And those are just these long-lasting skills, like knowing how to root. I had an adult come back after, I think, almost 2 decades, and he didn't remember his forms. But when I was teaching him the forms, all his mechanics were spot on. You could tell he had good root, he had good transfer of power. So those are non-perishable skills. They stick with you. But perishable skills are things like reaction time, and timing, and even fear of a punch coming towards you, because that's something that's a little hard to get over. And if it's been a while since a punch has been coming towards your face, your body's natural reaction when something's coming at your face is to go, ugh,
Yeah.
So, so having a training partner, just to work stuff outside of your, 2 days a week at karate, can be massive as far as timing and reaction and just being comfortable with punches and kicks coming your way.
To go back to compatibility for a second, just to loop back. One thing I do want to mention is just it's okay to have different levels of compatibility based on environment. So, like, if it's someone who's going to critique your form, you may be comfortable with one person doing that and not somebody else. Or if it's sparring, you may want to run forms with someone who's got like an encyclopedic knowledge of the curriculum, but when it comes to sparring, you want to like spar different body types and stuff. So it's also good. It's awesome to have a preferred training partner. That doesn't mean you should shy away from other training partners too. And I guess that's the big thing with trust is, like you mentioned, it's not like a static thing. You could have a partner that is an amazing training partner for one era of your life, and then, the next, all of a sudden, it's less appropriate. It could be that, there's a training partner that was too rough for you at the beginning, but you get excited by the challenge the more skillful you grow. So trust isn't static. It can be built. It can be withdrawn from. Depending on, outside of karate, you might be more friends with somebody than in a group class. We've all had a training partner that we've gotten distracted by. So in general, as part of like attentiveness, I would also kind of put a bullet point of, to be an amazing training partner, you want to understand how you come off when receiving feedback. So, and that'll also change person to person, how defensive are you? How clear is the communication? Is it one of those things where it can be a back and forth, or you kind of have to let them finish before you can start? I think that learning to receive constructive feedback is probably one of, if not the most powerful, like skills that you can develop, especially in our current age where everything is an echo chamber. And it's just way too easy to find a bunch of voices that will just agree with you. I find that it's that ability to live in the discomfort of disagreement that is so valuable, especially if you want to grow as a martial artist.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And not even necessarily that you have to agree with the feedback. Because especially with our system, and you and I are starting to get information from a lot of different sources.
Yep.
And sometimes I'm critiqued in one way for one form, and then completely the opposite way on the same form by another instructor.
Yeah.
And the goal at that point is to smile and nod and find those gems, those pearls of wisdom that are in there. Because even though they might be two completely different, stances on the form, they both have a lot of value, and so you being able to, stand guard at the doorway to your mind, and take in what's necessary, because I guarantee, whatever the critique is, there's going to be something in there that can help you. Yeah.
Well, and also it's recognizing that both of them can be right, especially for them.
Yeah.
It's what's going to be right for you. So. Again, this is just top of mind because I've been really deep into it, but in the TTRPG realm, there was, I'm looping back to that, there was a debate that I was listening to on a podcast, and it was very heated, relatively to how these things usually go, and it was about this one game design decision, and both people were coming from pretty valid places. I happen to agree with one end of the of the argument way more than the other, but the thing I kept reminding myself while listening to it is, for those people, they're so passionate about the reason they like it because it would work from their point of view. It would work with their players. It would work, with their leadership style. For me, I know it probably wouldn't. And it's just the people I tend to play with, the kind of games we like to play. It's just different. And it doesn't even come down, like, kind of like martial arts have different systems. Is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu better than Muay Thai? Like, that whole debate. You get those same systems arguments, but it's not about the system. The system is just a toolbox depending on what you want out of it. So, and some people can take multiple systems and not run them as intended, but still get a lot of value out of them. Some people, they're very system dependent. They need the rules to tell them what to do. And both of them can be right as long as the result is produced. To go back to Master Valari's book, the best technique is the one that works. Yeah. So, especially when you're getting paradoxical information, it can be kind of hard to sort through. But I think, like you said, the pearl of wisdom is to run tests on it and see what works and what you like. And just because you don't like something doesn't mean that it's bad. And just because you like something doesn't mean that it's good. Yeah. There was a sparring thing this past week where I was doing a drill, and one of our third degrees was like, I don't like this. And I said, you don't have to. That doesn't mean it's not valuable to practice it, even if you never intend to use it. Mm-hmm. But it's still sometimes good just to experience it, and if nothing else, have it for context for future things that you learn. So, amazing training partner. Really, it all comes back down to trust. Action steps would be attentiveness, paying attention to your recovery systems, clear communication, honest communication too, and then how well you receive feedback. Dom and Johnny in the morning.